Okay, welcome back. Our goal here is to uncover strengths and features and conventions of ASP.NET MVC by creating tiny little experiments. So let's get started by creating our first Hello World project. Make sure in the new project dialog go to Templates, C# Web. We'll choose that ASP.NET Web Application option, and we're going to call this Hello MVC. And click OK. And the new ASP.NET project dialog pops open. We're going to do like we've done previously with web forms, choose an empty template, but add folders and core references for MVC. We're not going to add unit test yet. We're not going to host in the cloud. Go ahead and click OK. And if we take a quick look in the Solution Explorer, there's going to be several things that we recognize from our work in web forms and several new things. So things that we've seen previously, we have, for example, the properties and references nodes in the project, also a folder where we could put a local DB, for example, global ASAX where we could write code to handle key events in the life cycle of the ASP.NET application and pages specifically. And then also for configuration purposes, we can make configuration changes in the web.config file. There's also a packages.config file, which we learned is part of the NuGet functionality to ensure that we have the correct versions and assemblies for this project in the future. And then there are some new folders. For example, we have controllers, models, and views, and inside the views folder we have another web.config file. And so we'll talk about the second web config in just a moment. However, the very first thing we'll do is just actually run the application. Now, we've written nothing at all, and we get a 404 error. And I think it's important to understand that at this point, since we've written nothing, we've added no code into our application, that a incoming request is made into our application and there's nothing there to handle it. That's why we get the 404 error. And so let's begin by creating a new controller. And controller, we'll talk about it in depth in an upcoming lesson, but think of it as an orchestrator. Its role as a manager in the application. It's what processes incoming requests that are sent to it from the web server. And so it decides what data should be either received from the end user or presented to the end user. And then it decides which template to use, which view to use to render that data to the user, or where it should redirect the user so that it can view different information. So let's go ahead and add a new controller. Unfortunately, if I don't do this correctly, it's going to extend off to the right hand side in the non-recorded area. So I drag the Solution Explorer over, I right click and select Add Controller, and that will open up the Add Scaffold dialog. We'll talk about what scaffolding is a little bit, but essentially think of it as scaffolding in a building. It helps you build a building or raise a building up more quickly. So it's going to give you some boilerplate code that will give you some baseline functionality to begin with. We want to create an empty controller, but you can see that there are some other options here to create controllers that have some additional functionality. We'll get to those later. Let's go ahead and select the Add button, and now we're asked to name this new controller. And so this is important. What I want to do is replace the word default with the word home. And the reason I'm doing this is because ASP.NET MVC relies on a design philosophy called convention over configuration. Convention over configuration. In other words, instead of configuring which controller the application should look for when a new incoming request comes to our application for just the root of our application, the ASP.NET MVC routing system will, by default, look for the homecontroller.cs in order to route that request to. Specifically, it's going to look for a method in that home controller request called index. So let's go ahead and click the Add button, and you'll see that the file is generated. It's scaffolded out with a index method. Now this index method, notice that it returns an object of type action result, which we'll talk about later. And also notice that by default the scaffolding will return the result of this view helper method. And so this method comes from the fact that we have inherited this controller class for our new home controller. You can see that public class home controller inherits from controller. That's part of the MVC framework. That controller definition has a method called view, which we're calling, and this view method returns something called a view result. And there's other ways we can call it. You can see that there's seven overloads, but this view result must be related somehow. It's of type action result. Okay, so we'll talk about that relationship and the different types of view results that can be returned from a view method. But at any rate, now that we've got that, let's go ahead and run the application, and we'll notice we still get an error, but at least we get a more descriptive error this time. It says that the view index or its master was not found, or no view engine supports the searched locations. The following locations were searched, and so it gives us the /view/home.index or index.aspx, index acx, views shared index.aspx, index ascx, views home index cshtml, vbhtml, or views shared index cshtml, view shared index vbhtml. Alright, so first of all, it looks inside of a folder called home inside the views directory. So why is it looking there first? Well, because again, it follows this design philosophy of convention over configuration. If we have a home controller, the convention is that we should add views, or rather the templates that will display data from the controller into a folder called views/home, and so on. So it looks for, first of all, ASPX or ASCX files, and then in that same folder, index.cshtml or vbhtml. We'll talk about these file extensions in just a moment. However, what we want to do is take a look now. As we added that new home controller, notice that it added a home directory in the views folder. So what we'll do inside of here is we can right-click and select Add, and unfortunately it pops up to the upper right-hand corner of the screen. That we could add a new item, a new CSHTML file, but there's another way to do this, is just go inside of this index method and say I need to generate a view that will be used by this action result method. So I'm just going to right-click and select Add View, and it pops open the Add View dialog. Great. It knows the view name index because we created it in the context of this index action method. And we'll go ahead and make sure that the template is empty for now. Someday we'll come back to this and we'll use some of the scaffolding around views. Also, I'm going to deselect the option to create a layout page for the first time we go through this. So I'm going to click Add. So as you can see, we've added an index.cshtml page, and I'm going to make no changes to it whatsoever and just run the application. And now at the very least we're going to get a blank page, so we don't get an error, so that's good. So let's talk about that index.cshtml page. First of all, that file extension is important, as we'll come to learn. It is combined CS and HTML. CS for C# and HTML for obviously an HTML file. If we take a look at it, it's mostly HTML, but then there's also this special little @ symbol with an open and closed curly brace. Well, we know the open and closed curly brace in C# defines a code block. And this @ symbol is special because it defines a certain type of syntax called the razor syntax. So whenever ASP.NET MVC sees that we're using a file extension .cshtml, it knows that we should be interpreting this file in a certain way. It is associated with the razor view engine, which will define a specific type of syntax used to combine static HTML with our dynamic C# in order to inject in either view logic or items from the model that we'll pass in. You'll see this used in just a moment. Now, here again, there are different styles that you can use to create views. That's why it looked first for the ASPX and ASCX files, if you recall when we got that error just a moment ago. That first style is called ASPX, and it closely resembles the style that are used to create web forms. However, the second style is called Razor, which is a shorthand syntax for creating views. It's very concise and convenient, as you'll see as we move forward, to switch between what is static HTML and what's dynamic C# that should be executed. Okay. All right, let's do this. Let's go ahead and delete what we've currently created, this index.cshtml page. And I want to recreate it. So I'm going to go back to the index action method, right click and select add view again. This time I'm going to go ahead and use a layout page. Now notice that if I don't specify a layout page, if I leave it empty, it's set in the Razor's view start file. So let's go ahead and click add, and then we'll go look for that view start file. And if we look in the views folder, there's two folders, a home folder and a shared folder, but then there's also this viewstart.cshtml page. And here again we see that little @ symbol with two open and closing curly braces, and inside of that code block we define a layout variable equal to views shared layout.cshtml. Alright, so that probably corresponds to this views shared folder, and if we open it up there's a layout.cshtml file. And inside here we see a bunch of HTML5 code, and if we take a look through it, there's references to CSS files and the JS files. There is a body, and it has all of the styling. We'll see what outputs there in just a moment. But notice here that we get this little @ symbol again, syntax highlighted, and it says viewbag.title and then my ASP.NET application. Here there's that @ symbol again, syntax highlighted, HTML.action link, and then further down there is this @renderBody method, and then finally there's this @date.now.year. Now let's keep that in mind as we take a look at the new version of our index.cshtml page. Okay, there's a lot less HTML inside of here. However, you can see that there's still this @ symbol with the open and closing curly braces, and then viewbag.title equals index. So it's defining a value here, and you can see that it's referencing it inside of this layout right here. So it'll be interesting to see if in the title bar of the tab in Internet Explorer it says index-my-ASP.NET application, right? Back here we can see that there's all that's left here is just this word index as an H2. So let's change this up to Bob changed this and see what happens. See the sparks fly. So now let's run the application. Okay, and so we can see that we have some, cut all that out. So we can see that we have this black bar, the application name here. If we take a look in the bar itself, there's index, like we thought we would see, -my ASP.NET application. We see Bob changed this. Then we see this, the year that I created this. All right, 2015. All right, so a couple of things were at work here. All of this that's defined here will get inserted into this render body method. Okay, we'll talk about that in just a moment. We can see that we dynamically injected in the year by using this little @ symbol, this Razor directive, I guess you could call it, the @ symbol, in order to inject in the year -my ASP.NET application in the footer. We injected in the value of viewbag.title here that we defined in this code block here at the very top of the index.cshtml page. All right, so hopefully you can start seeing the relationships between how these two are used. The underscore layout.cshtml page becomes kind of the Chrome or the template, and then we just inject information in mainly to this render body area here in the middle. So anything that I put here, let's just put let's put an H1 I added this too, and then below that, hello again, okay, and then let's rerun the application. So all of that I wrote in the index.cshtml, it gets poked into that little area right here inside of this layout Chrome that we defined around it. Now we can still poke in other bits of information like the word index and like this date here, but for the most part all of the things that we define in that index.cshtml page are for the body or the middle portion of it. Also I want you to notice that as I make this smaller, notice we get the little hamburger here up in the upper right hand corner, and if we take a look at that layout.cshtml file, notice that it is using Bootstrap for layout, and also the classes that it's using here, the container class and things of that nature, those are all rendered there. Okay, so that by default the scaffolding for layout pages will give us just a very simplified layout based on Bootstrap. Pretty cool. Alright, now what we said before was that the controller is the orchestrator, and it marries data from the model, which we haven't talked about yet, and it passes it to the view to be rendered. So how can we pass data from the controller to the view so that we can see dynamic information created here inside of that template, that index.cshtml page, that view that we created? All right, there's a bunch of different ways to do this, and we're going to learn about all of them as we go forward. But one of the simplest ways as we get started is to just use that view bag object that we saw referenced in both the index.cshtml and the layout.cshtml file. And it allows us to create what are called dynamic properties, which means I don't have to define a property on this thing before I start using it. So in other words, I can just create a property called Bob created this value, and I can set that equal to anything I want. So in this case, I'm just going to go hello MVC. And then in the index.cshtml file, I'm going to change, Bob added this too, and I'm going to reference that view bag by using that @ symbol. So I'm going to escape out into the MVC syntax, and I'm going to go add view bag dot Bob created this value, like so. All right, now let's run that application. And you can see that what I created in the controller I was able to inject into the view by using a view bag. Again, there's a couple of different ways that I can inject data, especially model data, into this view, and that'll be the focus of the majority of this series. But here's a nice simple way that I can poke data in. Now, I didn't see my H1, why not? Oh, created. See, now here's the problem with the dynamic property, is that if you spell it wrong in one place, there's nothing that will prevent you from referencing a different property name. So really, I created a property name and set its value, and then I referenced a different property name because they had one letter difference. I missed a D. And why didn't it give me an error? Because that's the nature of dynamic properties. All right. In the static language, you define everything up front, and if you use an incorrect property name, you reference it, it will throw a compilation error, but not with dynamic properties. Okay, so therein lies the danger and why we don't use view bags all over the place. There's a better way, and we'll use strongly typed models and pass those into the views in the future. Right? So let's rerun this and see the correct result. I'm actually glad I made that mistake. All right, there we go. Hello MVC. Great. Okay. Now let's go ahead and push forward with this example a little bit. What if I wanted to pass from the index action result method into the index.cshtml page? What if I wanted to pass in an instance of a class or even a collection of objects, or what I would call an object graph, to the view? Well, in that case, what I would call that collection of objects or even an instance of one object is the model. It is the data that we want rendered out to the user from the controller to the view. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. In the models folder, I'm going to right click and select add. You won't see it, but I'm going to just add a new item, and all I'm going to do is just add a simple C# class, if I can find it in this long list here. Here we go. Let's go code class. There we go. And I can call this anything I want, but I'm just going to call it hello model.cs. Right? And here's what I'll do. I'm actually going to create two classes inside of this namespace. The first one will be the car, and I'm just going to copy and paste a simple car definition here, like so. Alright, so pause the video. If you need to catch up, please follow along. Public class car, and I just add a public int ID. So I just went prop tab tab, int ID, enter, prop tab tab, string, make, string model. Okay, make sure you have that. And then what I want to do here in this public class hello model is create a method, a static method that returns instances of a car as a collection of cars. So again, here, pause the video. Here I'm creating a static method called getCars, and it's going to return a list of car objects. And so here I'm just creating a new instance of list of car called cars, and I just start using that shorthand syntax to add new instances of car to that collection. So these are object initializers, and then the whole thing is a collection initializer, right? So I create 3 cars, BMW, Hyundai, and Toyota, and then I'm going to return that collection to the caller, all right? So assuming that you've created all this as the hello model.cs file in the models folder, let's go back to the home controller now. And what I'll do here is I'm going to make a call out. So we'll go var cars equals hello model, and I guess I'll go hello model. It's in a different namespace, so I'm going to hit Control period on my keyboard. I'm going to add a using statement for the models namespace. So hello MVC.models, and that will get us access to that folder models.hellomodel.cs. So hello model dot get cars. So that should return us back that list of car objects. I'm going to pass that into the view method, because I know one of the overloads is that I can pass a object graph into the view. Now what will be expected on the other side is here in this index.cs HTML. So over on this side, what I'm going to do is use this directive add model, and what I expect to be passed into this is the hello MVC dot models dot car. Well, actually, yes, a list of hello MVC dot models dot car, like so. Okay. So far so good. So I'm passing in a strongly typed model, a list of car, and then what I want to do down here is I'm going to write some razor syntax. So watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to use that razor @ symbol, and then I'm going to do for each tab tab. Whoa. Okay, very cool. Car, var car in at capital M model, and I'll explain the difference between the lowercase m model and the capital M model. In fact, I don't even have to use that at. I can just do that right there. Great. Enter. And then I'm going to switch back and forth between C# and HTML in a line-by-line basis. And we'll talk about how razor syntax actually works, but hopefully you're starting to see the power of this. So I'm going to do the car ID dash the car dot make, and then add car dot model. Cool. Save all that, and then let's run it again. Okay, very cool. So now I've been able to render out my model to the end user by passing the model in a strongly typed fashion to the view. Inside the view now I can work with the model in a strongly typed fashion. I know that that model is of type list of car, so I can for each my way through it, and for each car I can just use that accessor for the razor syntax to get at the car, an instance of car, and then get to its individual properties. Okay, very cool. Now, the last thing that I'm going to do here is just for fun. I'm going to make sure to select this and then go to Project and Add New Item. And this time I'm going to go down to web and I'm going to choose web form. Wait, Bob, have you lost your mind? What are you doing? Okay, don't worry, I know what I'm doing here. Default.aspx, click add, okay. And here I'm going to just type h1 hello from web forms and click save and run. Now notice that I have navigated to the default.aspx page. Let's say that I get rid of this and I'm going now to the hello controller index action method. But if I were to type in again default.aspx, so this just reinforces the idea that projects you could create are built on top of the same engine, whether you're using ASP.NET MVC or web forms, and so you can even mix and match them in the same project. But I can't foresee a reason why you'd really want to ever do that. Just as the old saying goes, just because you can doesn't mean you should. But it's an interesting idea and it's valuable for the purpose of learning how all this works. Okay, so we're off to a good start. In the very next lesson, let's spend some time learning a little bit more about what we did and why it actually worked, how it worked, and even add a little bit more functionality to this example and learn more about ASP.NET MVC in the process in a series of baby steps. All right, so see you in the next lesson.